There's a figure in ancient mythology who committed an act so rebellious, so fundamentally defiant, that the king of the gods himself designed a punishment specifically engineered to be eternal. Not death, something worse. Every single day, a massive eagle would descend from the sky and tear into his liver, ripping it from his body while he screamed in agony. And every single night, that liver would regenerate completely, so the torture could begin again at dawn. This went on for thousands of years. His crime? He looked at humanity, weak, cold, dying in the dark, and made a choice that would change civilization forever. He stole something the gods had forbidden humans to possess, something that would transform our species from trembling animals into builders of empires. His name was Prometheus, and the thing he stole wasn't a weapon, wasn't gold, wasn't even knowledge in the traditional sense. It was fire. But here's what almost nobody understands about this story. It's not actually about fire at all. Before we dive into what Prometheus actually did and why it matters more today than it did 3,000 years ago, you need to understand something crucial about ancient Greek theology that modern retellings almost always get wrong. The Greek gods weren't benevolent. They weren't interested in humanity's well-being. In fact, according to Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, our primary sources written around 700 BCE, Zeus and the Olympians viewed humans as somewhere between pets and playthings, useful for sacrifices, entertaining in their struggles, but ultimately insignificant. The gods had their realm, humans had theirs, and there were supposed to be clear boundaries that maintained cosmic order. Prometheus was a titan, part of the older generation of divine beings who ruled before Zeus and his siblings overthrew them in a war that literally reshaped the cosmos. But here's the fascinating part. Prometheus sided with Zeus during that war. He was a strategic genius, a forward thinker whose very name means forethought in Greek. He helped Zeus win. And yet, despite being on the winning side, Prometheus would become Zeus's greatest enemy. Why? Because of what he saw when he looked at humans. According to different versions of the myth, Prometheus either created humans from clay or was assigned to give them gifts after they were formed. Either way, he developed something the other gods didn't have: empathy for mortals. He watched them shivering in caves, unable to cook food, dying from infections, huddling in terror when the sun went down. They had no defenses against predators, no way to forge tools, no means of advancing beyond the most primitive existence. And Prometheus looked at this situation and asked a question that would get him tortured for eternity. Why? Why should humans be condemned to this? What cosmic law says they must remain helpless forever? The gods possessed fire, divine fire that burned in their celestial forges, that lit their feasts on Mount Olympus, that represented not just heat and light, but knowledge, craft, civilization itself. Zeus had specifically forbidden giving this fire to humans. He wanted them kept in their place, manageable, controllable, weak. Prometheus decided that was unacceptable, so he made a plan. Now, stealing from the gods wasn't like breaking into a warehouse. This required deception on a cosmic scale. According to the myth preserved by Aeschylus in his play Prometheus Bound, written around 430 BCE, Prometheus didn't just grab a torch and run. He went to the forge of Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, god of fire and metalworking, and took a glowing coal, hiding it inside a hollow fennel stalk. Think about the symbolism here for a moment. Fennel is a plant that grows wild that humans could access. He didn't use some magical divine container. He used something from the mortal world, as if to say, this fire now belongs to them, not to you. When Prometheus descended from Olympus and gave that coal to humans, teaching them how to kindle it, how to maintain it, how to use it, everything changed instantly. Within the logic of the myth, this single act catalyzed the entire development of human civilization. Suddenly, humans could cook food, making nutrients more bioavailable and literally enlarging their brains over generations. They could work metal, creating tools and weapons. They could gather after dark, developing more complex social structures and oral traditions. They could see predators coming. They could burn fields for agriculture. They could survive winter. Fire wasn't just heat, it was possibility. But here's where the story takes a turn that most simplified versions miss entirely. Prometheus didn't stop with fire. According to Aeschylus, once Prometheus had crossed that line, once he'd decided humans deserved more than the gods wanted to give them, he went all in. He taught humans mathematics. He taught them astronomy so they could navigate and track seasons. He taught them medicine, showing them which plants could heal and which would kill. He taught them architecture, animal husbandry, mining, writing, and prophecy. In one version, he even taught them how to perform proper sacrifices to the gods, but with a trick embedded in the ritual. He showed humans how to sacrifice the bones and fat, worthless parts, to the gods, while keeping the good meat for themselves, all wrapped in a way that made it look like the gods were getting the better portion. This is absolutely wild when you think about it. Prometheus wasn't just a thief, he was a revolutionary actively working to dismantle the power structure of the universe. He was teaching humans to deceive the gods in their own worship. And Zeus? Zeus saw every bit of it. What's fascinating from a psychological standpoint is that Zeus's reaction tells us everything about the nature of power and control. He didn't punish Prometheus immediately. Ancient texts suggest he watched, waiting to see how far Prometheus would go, perhaps curious about this unprecedented act of cosmic treason. But once humans had fire, once they began building and thinking and organizing, once they stopped being helpless, Zeus understood the existential threat this posed, not to his safety, gods were immortal, but to his authority. If humans could create their own light, forge their own tools, heal their own sick, did they even need gods? This is why Zeus's punishment was so specifically, horrifically creative. He needed to make an example that would echo through eternity. He needed every god, titan, nymph, and mortal to understand, you do not elevate humanity. You do not question the hierarchy. You do not redistribute divine privileges to those below your station. And so Prometheus was dragged to the Caucasus Mountains, the edge of the known world, and chained to a rock with bonds forged by Hephaestus himself, the same god whose fire Prometheus had stolen. The punishment wasn't just imprisonment. Zeus sent an eagle, his personal symbol, a creature of divine authority, to eat Prometheus's liver every single day. Now, ancient Greeks believed the liver was the seat of emotion and life force, making this torture not just physical, but spiritual. The eagle would land on his chest, its talons piercing his flesh, and spend hours tearing through tissue and organ while Prometheus, immortal and unable to die or pass out from the pain, experienced every second fully conscious. The Greek travel writer Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century CE, claimed you could still see bloodstains on the rocks in the Caucasus Range where this supposedly happened. Whether that's true or legendary embellishment, it shows how viscerally real this story was to ancient people. They believed these rocks existed. They believed you could visit the site of a god's eternal suffering. And every night, Prometheus's titan physiology would regenerate his liver completely, resetting his body for tomorrow's torture. No adaptation, no getting used to the pain. Every dawn it was as fresh and agonizing as the first time, for 30,000 years, according to some versions of the myth. But here's what makes Prometheus truly remarkable, and why this myth has resonated across millennia. He never apologized. In Prometheus Bound, Aeschylus has him chained on that rock, and when messengers from Zeus come offering to reduce his suffering if he'll reveal a secret prophecy, Prometheus knew which son of Zeus would eventually overthrow him. Prometheus refuses. Not because he's stubborn, because he genuinely believes what he did was right. There's a stunning speech in the play where Prometheus lists everything he gave humans. Fire, yes, but also hope. The ability to plan for the future, the capacity to dream beyond their immediate circumstances. And he says explicitly, I found them witless and I gave them wit. I found them helpless and I gave them strength. He owns what he did. He'd do it again. This transforms the story from a simple theft narrative into something far more profound, a meditation on whether progress justifies suffering, whether the advancement of many justifies the torture of one, whether defying unjust authority is worth the personal cost. Prometheus looked at an unfair system and decided his pain mattered less than human potential. The ancient Greeks themselves were conflicted about Prometheus. In Athens, he was celebrated. There was literally a festival called Prometheia with torch races honoring the gift of fire. The playwright Aeschylus portrayed him as a tragic hero whose punishment was unjust. But in other traditions, particularly those emphasizing social order and respecting authority, Prometheus was dangerous, a cautionary tale about the price of hubris and rebellion. This split interpretation makes sense when you consider what Prometheus represents philosophically. He's the embodiment of the question, should we accept the world as it is, or should we change it even if change comes with terrible personal consequences? Should we respect power structures because they're powerful or because they're just? Is suffering for others' benefit noble or foolish? Every revolutionary, every whistleblower, every person who's exposed injustice knowing it would destroy their life, they're echoing Prometheus. And every society has to decide whether to celebrate them or condemn them. Usually, we condemn them while they're alive and celebrate them after they're safely dead. This is where the Prometheus story stops being ancient mythology and starts being uncomfortably relevant. In 1818, Mary Shelley subtitled her novel Frankenstein, The Modern Prometheus. Why? Because Victor Frankenstein, like Prometheus, took divine power, the ability to create life, and gave it to humanity, himself a mortal. And like Prometheus, he suffered endlessly for it, not chained to a rock, but psychologically tortured by the consequences of his creation. Shelley understood that Prometheus wasn't really about fire. It was about the danger and necessity of humans reaching beyond what they're supposed to have. In the 20th century, we named a radioactive element promethium, used in nuclear batteries and glow-in-the-dark paint. We use the word Promethean to describe any ambitious attempt to exceed normal human limitations. We apply his story to genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, nuclear power, any technology that gives us godlike capabilities with potentially catastrophic consequences. Every time scientists splice genes, every time we edge closer to general AI, every time we manipulate the fundamental forces of nature, we're stealing fire from the gods, and we never quite know if the eagle is coming. But there's a part of the Prometheus story that almost never makes it into popular retellings, and it completely changes the meaning. Prometheus was eventually freed. In most versions, Hercules kills the eagle and breaks Prometheus's chains as one of his labors, and Zeus, for complicated mythological politics reasons involving that prophecy Prometheus knew, allows it. After 30 millennia of torture, Prometheus walks free. Except he's forced to wear a ring made from his chains with a piece of the rock embedded in it, a permanent reminder of his punishment. The Greeks called this the first ring worn by humans. Jewelry originated as a mark of divine punishment internalized. Think about that symbolism. Prometheus is free, but he carries his prison with him forever. He transformed his torture into an ornament, something visible that proclaims both his suffering and his survival. Is that liberation, or just a more sophisticated form of bondage? Are we ever really free of the consequences of our choices, or do we just get better at wearing them? And if Prometheus represents human progress, our constant theft of capabilities we're not supposed to have, then maybe we're all wearing that ring. Maybe every advancement carries its punishment embedded inside it. Here's the interpretation that historians and classicists have been arguing about for centuries. What if the story isn't about punishment at all? What if it's about price? Scholar Carl Kerenyi pointed out in his 1946 work, Prometheus, Archetypal Image of Human Existence, that in the Greek worldview, there's no progress without suffering, no advancement without sacrifice. The liver that regenerates every night isn't just torture, it's also renewal, the capacity to endure. The eagle isn't just Zeus's vengeance, it's the inevitable consequence of reaching beyond your station, a cost that must be paid daily. In this reading, Prometheus knew exactly what would happen. He had forethought, after all. He could see the future. He knew Zeus would chain him to that rock. He knew about the eagle. He gave humans fire anyway, with full knowledge of the price. That's not tragedy. That's conscious sacrifice. It's the myth saying progress requires someone to suffer for it. Civilization requires someone to bear the weight. Advancement requires martyrs. And the question becomes, are you willing to be Prometheus, or do you want to stay warm by the fire someone else stole? This is where the myth becomes intensely personal, because every single person who's ever stood up against authority, who's ever shared information they weren't supposed to share, who's ever helped someone at great cost to themselves, they felt that eagle. Maybe not literally, but the mechanism is the same. You do the right thing, you pay for it, and you pay for it, and you keep paying for it. The teacher who reports abuse and loses their job, the employee who exposes corporate fraud and gets blacklisted from their industry, the scientist who publishes inconvenient data and watches their funding evaporate, the whistleblower who lives in exile. They're all chained to their own rocks, experiencing their own daily eagles, wondering if they'd make the same choice again. Most of them say yes. That's the Promethean spirit, the willingness to endure personal hell for collective benefit. But let's be honest, it's also exhausting. It's also lonely, and society has a terrible habit of enjoying the warmth of the fire while forgetting who stole it and what they paid. The reason Prometheus has survived as a cultural symbol for nearly 3,000 years isn't because the story is happy or even particularly hopeful. It's because it articulates something true about the human condition that we recognize instinctively. Progress is transgressive. Every major advancement in human civilization involved someone breaking a rule, violating a norm, defying authority, or redistributing power. Agriculture required humans to stop wandering and claim land. Transgressive. The printing press broke the church's monopoly on written knowledge. Transgressive. Democracy violated divine right monarchy. Transgressive. Civil rights movements defied legally enforced hierarchies. Transgressive. The internet decentralized information control. Transgressive. And in every single case, the people who pushed those boundaries suffered. They were imprisoned, executed, exiled, bankrupted, or destroyed. Some eventually got statues, most got graves, but the fire spread anyway. That's the deeper magic of the Prometheus story. It's not just about one titan's choice, it's about the irreversibility of certain kinds of knowledge. Once fire escapes into the human world, you can punish Prometheus all you want. You can't put the fire back. Once humans know they can have something, can do something, can be something, the gods have lost control. Here's a detail from the original Greek sources that shifts everything. Prometheus's gift wasn't actually fire in the literal sense. The ancient Greek word used is pure, which, yes, means fire, but also means something closer to spark or kindling principle. Hesiod describes it as seed of fire in some translations. Prometheus didn't give humans a torch that would eventually burn out. He gave them the capacity to create fire themselves, the knowledge and ability to generate it whenever needed. This distinction is crucial. A torch is a one-time gift. The ability to make fire is self-perpetuating power. Prometheus didn't create dependency. He created independence. He didn't give humans something they'd need refilled by the gods. He gave them the tools to never need the gods for this again. That's what Zeus actually punished. Not theft, liberation. Not taking something divine, teaching mortals they didn't need divine gifts because they could create themselves. Every act of human creativity, every moment of innovation, every time we solve a problem without external authority, we're rekindling that original spark. We're proving Prometheus was right. Modern psychology has actually studied the Promethean complex, the simultaneous drive to achieve something great and the fear of punishment for overreaching. It appears in gifted children who deliberately underperform to avoid standing out, in employees who don't share innovative ideas because they've seen others shot down, in activists who self-censor because the cost of speaking up is demonstrably high. The myth gave us language for a very real psychological phenomenon. We're attracted to fire. We know we need fire, but we're also viscerally aware that reaching for it has consequences. Therapists working with whistleblowers and activists report that many experience a form of trauma remarkably similar to Prometheus's regenerating liver, a cyclical suffering that doesn't diminish over time. Every news cycle brings fresh attacks. Every legal filing brings new stress. The punishment renews daily. And yet, when asked if they'd stay silent if they could go back, most say no. They'd steal the fire again. Understanding this complex helps explain why human progress is so painfully slow despite our obvious capacity for rapid change. We're collectively terrified of the eagle. If you look at history through the Prometheus lens, patterns emerge that are almost disturbing in their consistency. In 1633, Galileo faced the Inquisition for saying Earth orbited the sun. He stole astronomical fire from the church's cosmology. He recanted under threat of torture, was placed under house arrest, and spent his final years blind and broken. The fire spread anyway. In 1955, Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old black girl, refused to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama, 9 months before Rosa Parks. Colvin was arrested, ostracized, her life derailed. The civil rights movement minimized her role because she became pregnant while unmarried. She stole the fire of resistance, paid brutally, and history mostly forgot her. The fire spread anyway. In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed mass surveillance programs, sacrificing his freedom, his country, his normal life. He lives in exile, still debated as traitor or hero. He stole the fire of government transparency. The fire spread anyway. The pattern: individual suffers, often horribly. Change happens anyway. The theft succeeds. The punishment succeeds. Both are real. The myth says, this is how it works. This is the mechanism of progress. It's not a bug. It's the system functioning exactly as designed. But here's the most mind-bending irony buried in the mythology. Zeus's punishment of Prometheus actually proved Prometheus right. By chaining him to that rock, by making his suffering visible and eternal, Zeus created the ultimate symbol of defiant heroism. He turned Prometheus into exactly what Zeus wanted to prevent: an inspiration to mortals, a model of courage, a demonstration that standing up to authority is possible. If Zeus had just killed Prometheus or imprisoned him where nobody could see, or even forgiven him, the story would be different. But the theatrical, excessive, visible punishment made Prometheus immortal in human memory. Zeus literally couldn't help himself. He needed everyone to see what happens when you defy him. And in doing so, he ensured everyone would remember the defiance, not just the punishment. This is the paradox of authoritarian overreaction throughout history. Excessive punishment often creates martyrs, and martyrs inspire more rebellion than the original act ever did. Modern activists understand this implicitly. They know that visible suffering for a cause often advances that cause more than the initial action. Prometheus didn't win by stealing fire. He won by how he bore the consequences. So where does that leave us, sitting here thousands of years later, still obsessed with this story? I think it's asking us a question we'd rather avoid. What's your fire? What knowledge, what truth, what capability do you have access to that others need but don't have? And more importantly, what price are you willing to pay to share it? Most of us never face this choice in mythological terms. We're not stealing from gods or defying cosmic order, but we face smaller versions constantly. Do you speak up when everyone else is silent? Do you share the credit that others take? Do you help the person who can't help you back? Do you tell the truth that costs you something? These aren't dramatic. There's no eagle, no chains, no eternal torture. Just small daily choices between comfort and conscience, between keeping what you have and giving what's needed. Prometheus' story endures because it insists these choices matter. It says your individual moral courage, or lack thereof, shapes civilization. That's terrifying. It's also kind of exhilarating. Here's the final twist that brings everything together. In some versions of the myth, particularly in Aeschylus's lost play Prometheus Unbound, Prometheus is freed not just physically, but reconciled with Zeus. They reach an understanding. Zeus acknowledges that humanity having fire wasn't actually the catastrophe he feared. Humans used it to build civilization, create art, develop philosophy, worship the gods more meaningfully. The fire improved everything, even for the gods. And Prometheus acknowledges that there are some limits, some boundaries that protect rather than restrict. The mature version of the myth isn't about eternal conflict between authority and rebellion. It's about the painful negotiation between necessary order and necessary progress, between stability and growth, between respect for wisdom and challenge to power. It suggests that the Promethean impulse, the drive to advance, improve, liberate, and the Olympian impulse, the need for structure, limit, sustainability, aren't actually opposites. They're both essential. The question is finding the balance that allows fire to spread without burning everything down. The Prometheus myth survived 3,000 years because it encoded something essential about who we are and what it costs to become better. It's brutally honest about the price of progress. Someone bleeds for it. Always. It's equally honest about the necessity. Without people willing to steal fire, we'd still be in the dark. The story doesn't tell you whether to be Prometheus. It just shows you what happens if you are, and trusts you to decide if it's worth it. Every person who shares knowledge meant to be hoarded, who redistributes power meant to be concentrated, who elevates others at cost to themselves, they're lighting a torch from that original stolen coal. And yes, sometimes the eagle comes. Sometimes the chains bite. Sometimes you regenerate just to suffer again tomorrow. But somewhere, someone is warm who wasn't before. Somewhere, someone can see who was blind. Somewhere, someone is building something impossible with the tools you gave them. That's the fire. That's what it costs. That's why the story won't die. Because as long as there's injustice to defy, knowledge to share, and people willing to bear the cost of making things better, Prometheus isn't chained to a rock in the Caucasus. He's here. He's us. He's the choice we make every time we're asked, will you reach for the fire, knowing what comes next? The gods are watching. The eagle is ready. The fire is waiting. What do you do?